China sends in the clones. This is SkyWatchTV for Tuesday, December 1st, 2015. I'm Derek Gilbert. The world's largest animal cloning factory is reportedly under construction in China. The factory will be nearly an acre of space under roof, and it plans to produce 100,000 cattle embryos a year, which would be about 5% of China's premium beef market. They also plan to investigate, research the cloning of champion racehorses and sniffer dogs for search and rescue operations. The factory is a partnership with Suam Biotech, a firm based in Seoul, South Korea, run by Hwang Woo-suk, who was found guilty in 2006 of fraud and gross ethical lapses in his research involving human embryos. Chinese labs have been producing genetically modified double-muscled beagles and micro-pigs, which are being sold for pets. One analyst has called China the Wild West of genetic research. The company's CEO, Xu Xiaochun, says they're working to improve their ability to clone primates with the goal of eventually, someday, cloning humans. They say the technology is already there, but they're holding off because of negative public reaction. However, public reaction changes. Look at the radical change in public opinion of homosexuality over the last 25 years. Xu says currently, unfortunately, babies have no choice. They're half mom, half dad. But that cloning could give people a wide range of reproductive choices. A little bit of DNA material from here, a little genetic material from there. And this is where the transhumanist movement will meet the LGBT movement. Speaking of gene editing and cloning, biologists from around the world are meeting in Washington, D.C. as you watch this, part of an ongoing seminar this week or conference to debate whether the technique of gene editing should be banned. The conference was convened by the Chinese Academy of Science, the Royal Society, and the U.S. National Academies of Science and Medicine. The opening session this morning was a historical perspective on embryo and gene manipulation, and to the credit of the speaker, he was giving a pretty thorough history of the 20th century eugenics movement in the United States. Our science editor and my best friend and wife, Sharon Gilbert, is watching the live web stream of this conference today. We'll have more to say about this Friday during our weekly Sci Friday broadcast. Also coming from China, a new entry in the dangerous field of laws. Not rules and regulations, but lethal autonomous weapons systems. These small toy-sized robots can be armed with rifles or grenade launchers. Manufacturers and officials in China say that these will be used in anti-terror operations. The first set already on order by the Beijing police. In the Middle East, the war of words heats up between Turkey and Russia. You remember Turkish F-16 fighters last week shot down a Russian fighter bomber. Several weeks ago, President Putin told reporters on the sidelines of the G20 meetings in Turkey that he had proof, satellite photos, that ISIS was selling oil on the black market from wells that it controls in northern Syria. In all probability, even though the evidence would take too long to kind of unpack here, ISIS is taking advantage of an existing network of smugglers, traders, and shipping companies that already move oil on the black market from Kurdish operations in northern Iraq to a Turkish port on the Mediterranean Sea. Well, now President Putin is openly accusing Turkey of taking part in brokering the sales of black market oil from ISIS, and that the Russian plane was shot down last Tuesday to protect the supply route for this black market oil. Last Friday, Syria's information minister took it a step further. He named the son of Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan as the head of the company taking delivery of that ISIS oil. The son's name, Bilal Erdogan. President Erdogan of Turkey has responded with angry words, saying that he will quit, step down, resign, if proof is produced that Turkey buys oil from terrorists. I'm not holding my breath. Now, here's another factor that plays into the growing tension between Turkey and Russia in the Middle East. Spent some time over the Thanksgiving holiday trying to read the backstory of what's going on between the Syrians and the Turks and the Russians, and why this is a problem for all of these governments. Turkey and Syria have been spoiling for a fight for quite some time. Turkey, as we mentioned before, considers certain elements of the Kurdish people to be a terrorist regime, and specifically the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK. The leadership of the PKK 30 years ago, was basically given shelter in Damascus, headquartered out of Damascus. There have been arguments over water rights between Syria and Turkey that go back decades. Syria was finally forced to request that the PKK leave Damascus because Turkey actually threatened war some time back. So there's a long history here that goes a lot farther back than just the current struggle in the Syrian war, the Syrian civil war, which began in 2011. Well, along the Syrian border with Turkey are a number of villages where the Russian Air Force has been operating in support of the Syrian army, and a number of those villages are occupied by ethnic Turkmen. The Turkmen, as you might guess, are considered cousins by the Turks. And the Turkish government has, for some time, been arming these Turkmen into militia units which are fighting against the government of Bashar al-Assad. Currently, they are engaged in the fight for the city of Aleppo, which is the largest city in Syria. So, the Syrian army, backed by Iranian troops and the Russian Air Force, basically fighting these Turkmen militia near Aleppo, and the shooting down of the Russian plane then may have been about protecting the flow of ISIS oil, but it may also be a personal matter, with the Turks trying to protect their cousins on the Syrian side of the border. It just illustrates how convoluted and tribal the situation is in the Middle East. Loyalty extends to the family unit, at most to the tribal unit, certainly not as far as a federal government. And it makes us ask once again why the administrations of President Bush and President Obama thought it was a good idea to get tangled up in this mess in the first place. And by the way, word from Russia is that their pilots in Syria are now being armed to the teeth in a couple of different ways. First of all, these fighter bombers, like the one that was shot down last Tuesday, now being equipped with air-to-air missiles for the first time. That's a pretty clear message to NATO. Stay back. Pilots are also being issued pistols and AK-47s, which they're taking into the cockpit with them just in case they're shot down. They'd be able to defend themselves better than the two pilots who ejected from that plane last Tuesday. By the way, the body of the one pilot who was killed has been returned to Russia. The Turks did obtain the body from the Syrian rebels and returned it to Moscow. On a more mystical note, this conflict between Russia and Turkey to some may have prophetic implications. An 18th century Jewish scholar, the Vilna Gaon, or genius of Vilna, Lithuanian, prophesied it just before his death in 1797 that the Messiah's return, or Messiah's arrival, I should say, in Jewish belief, would be preceded by Russia capturing the Crimea, which of course Russia did from Ukraine in 2014. The other sign would be when the Russians reached Constantinople, which we know today as Istanbul. He wrote that when Jews heard of this taking place, Russians at the gates of Istanbul, they were to put on their Sabbath clothes and not take them off because the Messiah's return was imminent. Now, to be clear, here at SkyWatch TV, we do not give any credence to prophecies from outside the Bible. We mention this for the same reason that we discuss the prophetic beliefs of the Islamic State, to help us better understand what motivates people to do what they do. What you believe dictates how you live. And there are those who put faith in these prophecies, just as the Islamic State puts faith in the hadiths or alleged sayings of Muhammad. And that's what guides their actions. Now, another story from Russia, and I have to admit this one made me smile. Russia has declared the Open Society Institute, which is headed up by George Soros, a threat to their national security. And the OSI has been kicked out of Russia, added to Russia's list of undesirable foreign organizations. Now, that list also includes the National Endowment for Democracy, the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, the MacArthur Foundation, and Freedom House. We Americans may be offended that Russia would take issue with these nonprofit, non-government organizations operating inside their borders, but the truth is that many of them are funded, at least in part, by the United States government for the express purpose of carrying out American foreign policy. For example, the Open Society Institute was instrumental in building public support in Ukraine for the Orange Revolution about 10 years ago that brought a pro-Western government to power and toppled the pro-Russian government. The OSI during this time of the Orange Revolution, received millions of dollars from the U.S. State Department, which, as you might remember, was under the control of President George W. Bush. Left wing, right wing, same bird. Remember, technocrats like Soros are loyal to no political party. They have one agenda in mind, and that is globalism, rebuilding Babel. And one final note, thanks to modern genetic science, we can now drink the same wines as King David and Jesus of Nazareth. Research by Ariel University in the West Bank has identified indigenous grapes, grapes that are native to the Holy Land, thanks to DNA testing of wine presses that have been discovered at archaeological sites dating back to biblical times. And so now there are a couple of small wineries in Israel that are busy producing a variety of reds and whites from these grapes. But as with anything else in Israel, there is political tension between Israelis and Palestinians, even over wine. A small winery near Bethlehem, founded about 10 years ago as a joint venture between Palestinians and Italian monks, complained to reporters that just as Israelis have tried to take credit for falafel, tabbouleh, tahini, and hummus, now they're trying to take credit for the grapes from which they're making wine, and that the variety being used is Palestinian and grown in Palestinian vineyards. Funny thing is, I have friends from Lebanon and Greece, and they also claim that falafel, tabbouleh, hummus, and especially baklava come from their home countries as well. Tonight on SkyWatch TV, we talk about the Islamic State and what it believes and why it is such a clear and present danger, not just to the Middle East, but to Christians in general, Christians specifically in the Middle East, the Christian communities of the Nineveh Plain, and what we as Christians can do about it. Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Pentagon strategist, military commentator for cable news networks, and the author of the new book, Never Submit, Will the Extermination of Christians Get Worse Before It Gets Better?, is our guest tonight. SkyWatch TV airs on the Christian Television Network tonight at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 8:30 Central Time, on DirecTV Channel 376, Dish Network Channel 267, and the Glory Star Satellite Channel 117. If you don't have satellite television, you can watch it on your internet-connected device at the website of the Christian Television Network. They have a live web stream there at ctnonline.com. Colonel McGinnis will be one of the featured speakers at the 2016 Rocky Mountain International Prophecy Conference next July in Colorado Springs, along with other speakers like Paul McGuire, last week's guest on SkyWatch TV, or one of them, L.A. Marzulli, Avi Lipkin, Chuck Missler, many other speakers. Information and registration still ongoing, but closing out quickly, limited to the first 1,000 registrants. You'll find out more online at prophecywatchers.com. And every now and then I drop something to the internet. If you find those little nuggets to be of interest to you, you'll see them here, Facebook, Twitter, and my website. And if you have an email with a question or comment for me, please send it to dgilbert@skywatchtv.com. And thank you for watching. As we keep watch, I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is SkyWatch TV.